I remember Swami Kriyananda was here on his 70th birthday, or right around that time, and he was talking about the importance of shifting, from a real active life to I forget whether it's third ashram or fourth ashram or whatever, but doing that, and then he went on to do a bazillion other things, but I remember he sent an email out at one point in his later years saying, okay, I haven't been a good example of this, but it's really important, and so I just wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously something that many people at Ananda are dealing with, because our first generation, some of us are a little past the time when he gave that talk, so we're looking at that whole dynamic. The real dilemma is how to shift from outward activity to more inward activity without losing the oomph or the amount of energy. We're so used to, when we relax outer energy and tension, again coming back to energization this morning, that helps counter it, but we're so used to, when we relax, we slump. And the energy goes down, and the energy is not only lower in the spine, but there's less will behind it, less force behind it. And so what we don't want to have is a life where we stop activity but don't substitute something else that's, again, as Devi was saying, of higher priority. The 4 ashrams in India show us a really good progression of this, and America especially is like the antithesis of the last 2 ashrams. And so the 4 ashrams are, the first one is the student stage, and you're learning how to use your body, how to use your mind, how to speak, how to do all of those things, and that lasts up until you're finished with your schooling. And then the next stage is when you're actively pursuing a career. You become a householder at that stage, typically in India. You become a householder, you take on responsibility, you have to learn a trade, you have to practice a trade, you have to figure out how to lead a successful life, you have to figure out how to raise a family. And that's the second ashram. Now, America understands those 2. The third ashram is to begin to let go of that outer responsibility so that you're not doing, but at that stage you should be doing more mentoring and helping the people in the second ashram to fulfill their dharma. That's the third ashram. But I remember seeing a cartoon in the New Yorker where they have this kind of board meeting with the big table and all these old men sitting around it, and the caption says, "It's been moved and seconded that we change mandatory retirement age to 96. All those in favor." And so America fights that letting go because by and large we don't have an inner life that we should shift the energy to. And so that begins to look like you're going to die. And in fact, many people do die at the time they retire. The most dangerous time, I don't know if it's still true, it's beginning to shift now, but the most dangerous time is within the first 1.5 or 2 years after retirement. There's a big blip of death at that time. But that's for people that don't have an inner life. And if you don't have an inner life and have not developed it, then you either kind of, well, as Julia Child said, you either fall off the raft at that point. We had a lot of friends who gradually they fell off the raft, meaning they passed away. So you either fall off the raft or you kind of cease to be very, I don't know, to have much Shakti. And so, but those with an inner life should begin in the third ashram to shift their energy more and more to their inner life. Now, one of the things about Swami, and one of the things that happened in his life, is after his heart operation, not only he had an artificial valve put in and a pacemaker, and he couldn't achieve the depth of meditation that he had been able to do before that physical operation. And so the normal shift that he might have had to longer hours of meditation.
He couldn't go breathless because if you would stop breathing, the
pacemaker would kick in. And so for him, his whole life was dedicated to tuning his life to master. He couldn't do it as much inwardly as he himself would have liked, so he continued to do that activity outwardly, but he didn't necessarily recommend it for others. And then the fourth ashram, so that's the third ashram where you pull back, but you still keep an advisory role in the world. And the fourth ashram, in India, you retire to the forest or retire to the Himalayas, and you just spend the final years of your life trying to achieve self-realization or God realization. Now, we're struggling with that whole paradigm at Ananda, because now, one thing is the theory of it all. Now, the time has approached where we're needing to put it into practice. I must say, Devi and I are not very good examples. We're good examples of the third ashram, I must say, because we have, to a great extent, turned over management responsibilities and organizational guidance. But Ananda's still a young work, and we don't have a plethora of people who've been trained and who've come up. So we're having to carry a certain organizational role farther than what would really feel natural to us. Both of us, I think I'll speak for myself, but we long for the time when we can have more seclusion and more quiet time, but it's just more important to us than those outer things is our complete, absolute self-offering to master, to this path and to whatever dharma is asked of us to do. So we're working with that lesson, which is complete removal of any resistance to what needs to happen. But in an ideal world, we would have lots of other people who need the opportunity to be doing what we're doing, and we wouldn't travel so much, we wouldn't do all of those things quite so much, but we would mentor, and then eventually, a little later on, we would probably stop outward activity and just go into kind of seclusion and meditation and some teaching, but not as active as we are. But all of that, we're struggling to get that paradigm right for Ananda.
But there's also the fact that everyone's individual dharma is different.
Right.
And I think what Swami was saying, and when the letter that Bharati is referring to it surprised us all when Swami said, it's really good to plan to have the last years of your life where you're really withdrawn and having a more inward meditative life. And I haven't, Swamiji said, I haven't been a good example, but I don't want you all to think that you necessarily have to follow my example. But at the same time, you know, when Jyotish, I agree with what Jyotish said, but at the same time, there are 2 points. One, we're second generation disciples of a great world avatar who came to change the consciousness of the planet. And so it's not a life where we're going to get a lot of downtime. You know, this is a very dynamic mission. Maybe, you know, 5 generations from now, the majority of the people on earth will honor Sanatan Dharma and be meditating and so forth. But now, as we've been saying all morning, we're swimming against the current. And we just have to, you know, it's like that line in Alice in Wonderland where I think it's Through the Looking Glass, where she's walking with the White Queen. And the White Queen looks at the watch and says, oh, we have to start running. So they're running and running and running. And she said, okay, now we can stop. And Alice looks, and they're in the exact same place as they started. And she said, but we've been running and we haven't gone anywhere. And the White Queen says, oh, yes, in our country, we have to run as fast as we can just to stay where we are. And I mean, that's sort of how our society works. But on a higher octave, you know, I think in this lifetime, we have to work really hard to help establish Master's work. I remember Swami talking to 2 of our members. This was, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago in Assisi. And these are 2 men that had been involved with the work for a long time. And he said, Ananda's work is like a beachhead, like when the Allies landed at Normandy on D-Day, and you had to just give it everything you had. And so I think you have to factor that in to what you see around you. And then also to factor in how do we complete our karma? You know, it's like our son says to us, when are you guys going to stop? And we just say, when it's the right time. And maybe something will happen or things will change and we'll stop. But I can feel now for us, somebody asked, Anna Burdell asked a question Thursday night out at Laurelwood, and it was no one had ever asked me that question. She said, how, since Swami's passing, and when you're doing all this teaching and traveling, what changes do you see in yourself? And I had never really thought about that, but I could see all the growth that had come from all that. And so I thought, you know, we'll keep going as long as God gives us the strength to keep going, because I can feel it's a good thing. So anyway, it's a lot of different levels that question could be answered on.
And you can't answer too much personally, because Devi and I have a relatively unique role in the whole drama. And so...
Cheshire Cat.
Cheshire Cat, yeah. And Swami had an even more unique role. And so, but he didn't want the fact that he had a unique role to set the model or the precedent for everyone else, because it wouldn't be right. But we should ideally begin, after our active time, begin to interiorize the energy. And it's almost like, you know, the early years, the energy is going more and more outward, and then it peaks, and then it should go more and more inward until by the time it comes back to where it started, it should be completely inward, but without losing the energy or the momentum that's there.